say hello to Sylvia Marie Likens. This is the same photograph that is on her memorial. And while I don't know when it was specifically taken, it had to have been in the last year of her life and before she moved in with Gertrude and her children. Let me say, before we get into the aftermath of most of the players in this twisted story, that the charges against everybody else except for the 5 defendants we've discussed were eventually dropped. Shirley, who was 15, was charged as an adult, but everybody else was charged as juveniles. And based on my experience as a correctional officer at the Indiana Boys School, they basically did the same amount of time in juvenile hall as they would have done at either the Indiana Boys School or the Indiana Girls School, depending on, how they progressed their treatment plan. If they wanted to be little butts about things, they would have been there much longer. And if they were on track, they would have been out in 6 to 8 months. So, even though they were never formally convicted, they basically did their time. Natty Bumppo, a former Indianapolis Star reporter, later became an attorney. He would later say, "A lot of people have compared this to Lord of the Flies, a novel. But that was a bunch of uncontrolled children. In this case, they had an adult supervising what they were doing. It wasn't children going wild. It was children doing what they were told." Mr. Bumppo would also later say, "I never thought she was insane. I thought she was a downtrodden, mean woman." This is in reference to Gertrude's insanity defense. Personally, I think she was just plain mean. Now, Gertrude Banchevsky was convicted of murder, given a life sentence. On appeal, she won a new trial. Again, received a life sentence. She only did 20 years. And despite protests, the parole board again confirmed her release. She moved to Iowa, where Paula lived, and died at the age of 60 of cancer. Now, Paula gave birth to a baby girl in January of 1966 and named this child Gertrude. This child would later be adopted. Paula also won an appeal. And before a retrial, she pled guilty to voluntary manslaughter. She did 7 years. Moved to Iowa, became a farmer's wife. She took a job as a school custodian and was later promoted to a teacher's aide. In 2012, somebody recognized her on social media, doxed her to the school system, and she was promptly fired for lying about her criminal past. She has 2 sons, and there's really been no news of her since her firing. Now, poor Jenny never returned to school. In fact, after the trial, she lived for a period of time with one of the prosecutors. Eventually, she went into a program for troubled kids, got her GED, got some job training, and became a bank teller. She later married, had 2 kids. As I said in a previous video, Jenny's natural intelligence really showed during her testimony. She was a brilliant young girl, and the fact that her education was interrupted multiple times is a shame. She could have been so much more. Honest to God, I think she could have been a doctor or a lawyer, even despite the fact that those opportunities were restricted for girls in that era. Unfortunately, she died at age 54. She would later say, Mom's only mistake was trusting Gertrude. She never commented on her father's role in the girls living with Gertrude and her children. Stephanie Baniszewski testified against her family. During her testimony, she said that she wanted to become a lawyer. Gertrude testified that it was Stephanie who kept insisting, we need a lawyer post-arrest. Stephanie never became a lawyer, but she did become a teacher in Florida. Ricky Hobbs. He did 2 years in adult prison, which was the Indiana Reformatory in Pendleton, Indiana. A very old prison built in the 1800s. Very tough. Very adult. But after he got out, he would suffer a mental breakdown. And he died of lung cancer at the age of 21. Just like his mother died 2 weeks after Sylvia did. So his cancer was definitely genetically inherited. Coy Hubbard ended up being in and out of legal trouble most of his life. He would have 7 children. Unfortunately, his second child, Coy Hubbard Jr., died at the age of 5 months in 1971. Coy died at the age of 56. John Baniszewski Jr. I despise the 13-year-old kid he was, but I equally admire the man he later became. He would later say, reference the trial, that he relished the attention, but he was looking for love. John later became a real estate agent, a lay minister, and counseled other children of divorced. He died at age 56 of cancer. He also later said, my mom was a very selfish, self-centered woman. I think that is an understatement. Shirley Baniszewski, she was age 10 during this entire event and the trial. She was in the 4th grade, very, very highly intelligent. You can tell this through her testimony. I mean, for 10 years old, she did herself well on the stand, even though you can tell she's intimidated by the adult nature of the test process. Now, during the trial, she testified that she had been living with foster parents since just after Sylvia's death. And my question is, why didn't Dad step up? But we'll never know that answer. Dennis Lee Wright Jr., the baby. This boy, even though he was living with the same foster parents since his mother's arrest, was not adopted until he was 7 years old. And this is when Gertrude finally gave up her parental rights. This would have been after her second trial and her second sentencing. Sadly, his father and family never claimed him, even though Gertrude had established paternity in court. The family lived in Indianapolis. So they knew about this, and I find that incredibly sad. But finally, he's adopted by his foster parents. Now, he knew his mom was a murderer, but he didn't know anything else until he was 21. He had a mental health crisis and asked his adoptive parents for more information, which they did provide him. This information came from a social media post from his wife. She said he had bipolar, and that he also thought his mother was bipolar. Dennis died in his early 50s. Several of the other minor players also died in their early to mid 50s. Sylvia and Jenny, I hope I've done you proud during this series. I know you're in heaven, which means you're saints according to the Catholic Church. I'm so sorry you guys had to suffer this, especially you, Sylvia, but Jenny, I know you suffered equally as much. Again, I hope I've done you proud. Thank you, everybody, for following this series, and have a good day.